Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro podcast. Today is Thursday, March 27th. It is a little bit after 5 p.m. And we were talking about Choi Sang-mok potentially getting impeached as acting president during our last podcast episode. But of course, this
Something
being
else
South
happened
Korea,
first.
everything else happened. And as you might have already heard, Jeongmin is back on our episode because she has finally deemed us cool enough for her to join us again.
Yes, you are cool
Welcome
enough.
back.
Finally, thank you. Good to be back, and not good to be back because I'm back to all the mess in Seoul. Let's kick off with the Constitutional Court's decision, a ruling that, not the one that everybody was waiting on, but Han Duck-soo one. Han Duck-soo, the Prime Minister who was impeached shortly after he basically said he won't appoint the Constitutional Court justices. He's back.
He was acting president for less than 2 weeks, and then he was impeached on December 27th. And the once and future prime minister and acting president is returned since Monday.
And the Constitutional Court's reasoning behind reinstating Han, which very quickly put Choi Sang-mok back to finance ministry job that he used to do, and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as acting president, is that it was not severe enough of an offense to allow a Constitutional Court decision to uphold the impeachment. And the court basically said that such impeachment should be taken very seriously and carefully with high bar.
Essentially, they were talking about intent. Yes, it was unconstitutional, but the court said that there was no intent to actually harm the constitutional principles.
And that was interesting because intent matters usually in criminal cases, less in the constitutional court cases. But in this case, it was some people considered this as a sort of a preview of how the justices tend to interpret the constitutional law in other cases as well. And speaking of which, we have not heard yet from the Constitutional Court, not even just the ruling, but even ruling date. So there is a real possibility that the Constitutional Court ruling about Yoon might even go into April.
Yeah, and at the same time on April 18th, the two Constitutional Court justices that were appointed during the Moon Jae-in administration, they will also be leaving their positions.
Right, and because of that, that sort of is considered like a hard deadline for the Constitutional Court justices
At
to
least within the court.
rule. Right, but then there is also a black swan sort of scenario where they sort of don't decide until April 18th. What happens then?
Well, if they don't make a ruling by April 18th on President Yoon's impeachment, then those two justices will either have their terms renewed by the acting president or they might have to be replaced.
And that will create a whole lot of new scenarios that we cannot really predict right now. Let's leave it at that and move on to another domestic politics update, Lee Jae-myung. This was the biggest news of the week.
And it took me by surprise, to be honest.
Took us all by surprise.
All by surprise. He was acquitted from the Seoul High Court from his initial 1-year prison term, suspended 2 years from the lower court about the election law violations.
The Seoul High Court decided to take a very procedural approach toward Lee Jae-myung's earlier conviction. They were talking about how a photograph that was taken might have been manipulated to make it appear as though Lee Jae-myung was golfing with just one person and not an entire group of people. And they were talking about how Lee Jae-myung's statements about his memory of having met someone might have been more of an opinion as opposed to an actual matter of statement during an election. And so because of all these kinds of procedural approaches toward the lower court's ruling, the Seoul High Court said Lee Jae-myung is not guilty.
And the technicality there is that the court decided very technically that the false statements, the alleged false statement, according to the prosecutors that Lee Jae-myung made during the presidential campaign in 2021, did not actually intend. There's no evidence to prove that, he intended to mislead the voters during the campaign. And what's the implication now?
Well, domestically speaking, Lee Jae-myung is now free. He's got free reign to run for the presidency. Now, of course, the prosecutors will eventually, not eventually, they already have called for an appeal, which will take it to the Supreme Court. But assuming that the Constitutional Court either impeaches the Yoon by April 1st or whatever date within the next couple of weeks, the presidential election, the snap presidential election, will still have to take place within 60 days. And the Supreme Court will need to take a lot of time to try to get all the documents that it needs to hear all the cases. And so there's a very good chance that Lee Jae-myung will become president even before the Supreme Court is able to hear him out.
And the Supreme Court deadline will be, according to the law, June 26th.
Yeah.
That's far away.
But beyond the technicalities of the dates and whether or not it might overlap with the presidential election, more immediately speaking, Lee Jae-myung now no longer has any real competition from within his own party.
He even did not really have real competition within the party because a lot of party members and the supporters and the lawmakers were backing him up, basically. But there were a couple of surnamed Kim DP figures, multiple, who called for a fair primary within the DP if there is a presidential election. But now that he is acquitted in the High Court, it seems unlikely.
There is no challenge whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's been quite diminished.
So it's a happy week for Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And these were two very big domestic politics story. Let's move on to some foreign policy and trade relations news. There were big news this week in that area as well. John, can you fill us in?
Well, Donald Trump just several hours ago signed an executive order that said that...
Another one?
Another one. He's been signing them like
I lost
crazy.
count.
This latest one decided to impose 25% tariffs on autos and auto parts being imported to the U.S. Now, this already has one significant implication for South Korea. Chorus, the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, it's kaput. Because the way that Donald Trump decided to impose these tariffs was that he decided to cite national security. If you cite national security, that takes precedence over free trade agreements. Now, was there a real national security threat based on all these imports? My money says no, but who am I to say? The president said so.
Well, during the Biden administration, this term economic security became a thing. So maybe that's part of national security.
And Donald Trump took this ball and decided to take it home all the way running. And so because of the way they decided national security, Chorus FTA, nada. It doesn't matter. Whether or not Washington actually notified Seoul about this move in advance or whatever happened, because of the way they cited this particular law in the U.S., these tariffs are now law. And so, again, what we've always been seeing since Donald Trump became president is that anytime Donald Trump says anything about trade, the South Korean Trade Ministry and the Finance Ministry and the BOK or whatever will all of a sudden have these emergency response meetings to say, here's how we're going to respond. But while the South Korean government is busy having all of these meetings, the private sector is really ramping up their own movements.
All right. Industry reacted, actually preempted that pretty quickly. There were a couple of big companies that responded.
Ones. Hyundai Motor Group invested $21 billion in the U.S. This is going to go into their auto industries, into their EV manufacturing, into their batteries as well.
United States government made like a big announcement about it with big optics,
yeah,
right?
Research and development. Hyundai's chairman Jeongmin went to the White House to make this announcement.
I mean, good call.
And several days before Hyundai made that announcement, Korean Air decided to invest $48 billion to buy Boeing Dreamliner jets as well as GE engines. And so we're seeing billions of dollars of deals between South Korean companies and the US. And so all these South Korean companies are now saying, okay, now, well, this is the real big implication. For decades, South Korean companies, these Taebol conglomerates companies, acted like Korean companies. But now they're finally acting like actual multinational corporations. Now they're saying, okay, we're going to be based in Seoul, as we always have been, but is South Korea really that relevant anymore?
Right.
So you're saying that from these companies' point of view, they are not representing or working for the national interests of South Korea, but for the corporation.
At this point, corporate alignment and national security alignment are not the same anymore, it seems.
Right, but at the same time, it will be probably wise for the South Korean government, the Industries Ministry or MOFA to work very closely, at least behind closed doors, with these companies and others probably that did not make their trip to DC yet. Work closely with them so that the companies can tip the government off when it's needed, so that they can also get support from the government. There are precedents for that during the previous Trump administration. You know, when Trump was considering renegotiating Chorus FTA, this was actually figured out first by the corporate sector first ahead of the South Korean government, and they were the ones that reportedly tipped the government off. So they might be still onto that sort of tasks as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to society environment news. That was something very there is still something going on that is very, very disastrous, and it will reveal a lot of infrastructural blind spots that we should have been ready for years before. Joon Ha, can you fill us in with the wildfire news?
Yeah, so these are the largest ever wildfires that are on record. It's burnt right now over 36,000 hectares of land in the southeast region, and they're still ongoing in South Korea's southeast. And so far, it's claimed 27 lives, injured 32 others, according to the Central Disaster Headquarters just this morning as of 6 a.m. And the casualty count does not, of course, reflect the couple thousand hectares of land that has been damaged, including national treasures such as the Koun Temple.
1,000 years old.
1,000 years old. It was built in, I think it was 681 AD.
During the Shilla dynasty,
Yeah,
right?
during the Shilla dynasty, and it was destroyed completely.
That's horrible.
Yeah,
and Andong Hawemaul, which is also a historic site.
It's currently under danger and firefighters and fire authorities, they're trying to at least make the pre-countermeasures to make sure that the fire does not reach the Hawei Folk Village, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But it does look like the city of Andong is very much within the grasp of the blaze.
It looks like most of the people who are victims of this wildfire are senior citizens.
Yeah, all of the ones that have been documented are over 60, and most being over 60 and being at that age, they're not very well equipped in terms of health to actually evacuate in the best way format. And also some have also refused to evacuate, remaining in their own homes.
What was the reason?
I think it was not trusting the authorities or something like that.
I see. And also the firefighting authorities there, they are also very old as well.
Yeah, so we just saw yesterday that a helicopter crash landed near Uiseong while doing rescue operations there and firefighting operations. And the one that was driving, the pilot that was driving, was over 60. I believe that he was 63 or 64, if my memory serves. And to look at that as a demographic, South Korea is still very much an aging population, but to have that labor workforce be reflected in a situation like this is something that our government really does need to handle and look forward into.
Yeah, it sounds like it should have been something that the government should have looked into and do something with it in advance if they are aging.
Yeah, and these are not the first wildfires to happen in South Korea. We saw in 2000, we saw the huge wildfires in Koseong that took over 10,000 hectares of land. We saw in 2018, 2019, the wildfires then also in Gangwon-do. So these wildfires and pretexts will have had quite some implications for the South Korean government to actually act upon it and provide the existing countermeasures for the fire today. But the fireballs that are happening currently at the moment, they are being exacerbated by the strong winds.
Can you remind me how the fire started?
Yeah, so right now, officials are currently saying that the Uiseong fire, which was the one that started on March 21st, it originated from a cemetery visitor who accidentally started a blaze, and he or she was tending to a grave site. So authorities are currently planning to investigate and file charges to that.
So this is a thing with Korea specifically. There are a lot of graveyards, like private graves, especially in that region, actually. A lot of mountains. If you visit these areas, it's covered with family graveyards.
There's a very good chance that someone tried to clean up the area because of overgrowth and decided to set fire under the grass.
Which is also a thing.
Which is also a long-held practice. And this might have been the thing that really sparked it. Again, the fire authorities are looking into it. But beyond the loss of heritage sites, beyond the loss of lives and the helicopters that we've seen, all this fire that we've seen, tens of thousands of hectares of land are just going up in smoke. A lot of them are farmland.
Yeah, that's very serious.
And this will take years to recover.
Looking to stay informed about South Korea's fast-evolving political, business and cultural landscape? Join us on Korea Pro, the go-to resource for in-depth analysis expertly curated by top-tier professionals. And now you can pick the membership level that best suits your needs, thanks to our new subscription packages. Starting at just $199 annually, you can access daily analysis and our weekly podcast. Or try our premium membership package, which offers additional perks such as executive briefings, monthly reports and forecasts, networking receptions and event opportunities, as well as much, much more. To find the best fit for you, just head to signup.koreapro.org and become a member today.
Week ahead is April. We have a lot of things that we are expecting in April, but let's start with March 31st.
March 31st is when finally South Korea is going to resume short selling. And so we might see some return of rather chaotic moves in the Kospi and the Kosdaq. This would be the time to do it because of how much fluctuations that we've seen with the Korean won. But we'll see as to how this might actually proceed. The South Korean government has been saying that they're going to have these computer-backed systems that are going to make sure that all the short selling do not get out of hand, basically. But yeah, at least March 31st is the hard deadline that was set, and we'll see if that actually goes ahead as scheduled.
And we have April 2nd as well.
And yes, April 2nd, that's when Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs, yet more tariffs, will kick into effect. Now, Donald Trump has been saying one thing or another about these tariffs. He said that he will not, quote-unquote, bend the knee regarding reciprocal tariffs. But he's also at the same time said that he might not impose these tariffs uniformly, that there might be some room for exceptions. Now, he also did say that he doesn't want too many exceptions, but he did say there will be some. So we'll have to see how that really moves forward. But as I've already mentioned earlier, with all of these tariffs on automobiles, we can expect to see very similar kinds of tariffs to hit semiconductors, electric vehicles. Essentially, it's going to be a 1-2 punch for South Korea.
And there are things that are happening traditionally in April in South Korea.
Yeah, so the military, as you mentioned, traditionally does a military reshuffle every April. And
like a major high-ranking sort of...
Essentially, yeah. And so the high-ranking generals, the 4-star generals in this case, currently in the South Korean military, there are 7. 6 right now that are active since General Park Han-soo was head of the martial law
commander, yeah.
And he was dismissed from his duties. However, the remaining 6 who are set to be, if we are following the traditional precedent, then they will be set to be reshuffled. But since there is a current lack of understanding on who is the commander-in-chief and who has the authority to change the military leadership, it's still something that will probably remain in the future.
We don't even have a defense minister at this point.
We don't have a lot of... It's a lot of vacuum in many, many ministries and many units right now. And of course, the Constitutional Court ruling, if it ever happens next week.
And all this information will be sent to you in your email inbox by Monday, 2 p.m. via the Week Ahead newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Have a good weekend, everyone.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lee. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.